The Secret Library podcast is brought to you by listener support via the Secret Library podcast Patreon. You can check it out and become a supporter at patreon.com/secretlibrary. This is episode 126 of the Secret Library podcast. I am very excited to share today's episode. This has been quite an exciting undertaking that we've put together. I have not one, not two, but three guests today. And we created this panel about the process of editing. So our guests today are Natasha Lekic of New York Book Editors, which is a service that employs editors who have worked for Big Five publishers and are now independent editors. And two of the editors, Aaron Schlechter and Zach Kajewski, were kind enough to come on, and the four of us discussed the process of when you should hire an editor, how to choose an editor, times and places you may use an editor, and what that process is like both for the traditionally published, independently publishing authors, as well as those who have written a book and want to have it edited before submitting it for traditional publication. So this conversation is one you'll want to take notes for probably, or listen to more than once. And again, there's also some special resources that Natasha was kind enough to curate in order to take you inside the editing process. And there will be links to those in the show notes for this post. So I'm really, really happy that we were able to put this episode together for you, because I know there have been lots of questions about editing and working with editors for ages. So we're going to call this the editor panel, and I'm very happy to give you this episode. Hi, everybody. This is so exciting. This is the most people I have ever had on the show at once. We've already had technical difficulties and come back together, but I commend everyone for persevering, because we believe in the editorial process, and we're going to talk about it today.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So I want to start with Natasha, because our conversation started there. Because as you founded the New York Book Editors, I want to talk a little bit about what your vision was for that and sort of the overall picture of your editing vision.
Yeah, so originally this was, I guess, almost 6 years ago, when independent publishing was becoming a really viable option. And the original vision was, let's bring the same caliber of editors that publishers have in-house and the same process of editing to the independent space. Reality turned out to be a little bit different. Although we do that, we also help people get the attention of agents. So that's a lot of what we ended up doing as well. But that was the original vision.
Amazing. I think another thing, and we'll get into this more, but I think I want to hear from each of you. Again, we'll start with Natasha and then we'll move on, is a little bit about how the editorial process is different between developmental editing and sort of the line edit and the proofreading edit. Because this is a question I get a lot from people, is what are the differences between this? And people will just say, oh, I think I want to work with an editor, but they won't. It's kind of like saying, I think I need a lawyer, but not knowing which kind of lawyer you're going to work with. And I'm wondering if you could each say a little bit about what the differences are between those processes.
So I find that the naming sometimes changes from company to company, but usually when the term developmental editing is used, it means structural editing. So big picture changes. When you're at the line editing stage, you already have the foundation of your narrative down. So you're playing with pacing, prose. You're changing it on a line by line level, literally. And when authors, often authors know what they need, but sometimes they don't. So it's really best to have the editor evaluate the manuscript and determine which edit at that stage would benefit them most.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, like in my experience, I guess that we often have, I wouldn't say often, there are sometimes authors who are great writers and they're just kind of, they're doing the wrong approach. For instance, some people will just pick the wrong character to focus on, or perhaps the entire chronology is screwed up. So it would not benefit them for us to do a full line edit because they're going to be going back and revising all this stuff by themselves anyway. So yeah, generally Natasha sends us these projects. We take a look at them and we make a recommendation to the author as to what would best serve them. And they generally agree. We get through that on an initial phone call a lot, kind of talk through what their goals are. And a lot of these circumstances, people have already spent a whole lot of time kind of plotting out a plot arc before they started writing. And not to say that that's wrong. Some people just start with a character and see where the plot develops. But often when they've started with an outline as to the plot, it's hard to see if there's been a mistake made where the manuscript would benefit if it was done an alternate way. So.
Yeah, and I find with a lot of the more prescriptive nonfiction that I work on, the developmental edit starting kind of, at the very beginning of the process can be really helpful for authors to make sure they're kind of getting their idea down and fleshed out, as compared to going into the writing process with half-baked idea, which, in fiction might be more of a, proper approach. But, for the type of prescriptive work, I think it really helps to get that figured out at the very beginning. So, that's things like structure, the table of contents, really deciding on who the audience is, who you're speaking with. And at that stage, too, when they come to us to, do a sample edit or whatnot, it helps to figure out at that point the fit with the editor. And it's, some of these projects are going to take a long time. You're going to be working closely together with an editor. And so it's great if you can figure out early on, if you guys are going to work well and, kind of feed off each other's energy and all those good things.
So, Zach, I want to follow up on that.
Sure.
For those listening, we can't really see each other. So this is a very interesting sort of, it's like a mass of voices. It's like a group mind. But Zach, I wanted to talk, because you talked about for prescriptive nonfiction and working with nonfiction in an edit. Do you find that you get involved earlier in the process than, say, Aaron does with fiction?
Yeah, and in my experience, that is the case. And a lot of times that may mean I'm doing an editorial assessment of, in an early draft. But even more than that, I think starting again, I'm a big structure guy. I think for any type of prescriptive nonfiction, the structure, the TOC, getting that nailed down earlier on is really important to the progression of the book. It'll, save you some time in the end, but also it'll really keep you focused and going in the right direction. It also helps you avoid things like repetition and issues that would pop up if you kind of are just throwing all your ideas out there and then trying to, cram in a copy edit or something like that, or even a line edit for that matter. And, I can just discuss the difference between line edit and copy edit in my world as well, if you want me to.
Well, I had one follow-up question and then I want to jump back to fiction. Do you ever work with people on, say, a book proposal? Because I know a lot of people are working in the early stage with nonfiction in creating a book proposal and sample chapters and all of that kind of writing that they may submit and sell the book just based on the proposal alone.
Yeah. I find that, I end up doing a lot of that work. And that's a really great stage to have an editor come on, not only to help you with the sample chapters, but again, to really kind of nail down what's supposed to be in that proposal, how you're pitching it to an agent or even directly to, an editor, as compared to pitching it to the audience that will, the final reader. And so I end up doing a lot of work on proposals to help those authors, get it, really whip it into shape before they go to that next step of pitching it to people.
Got it. Okay. So Aaron, I want to talk to you a little bit about the stage in which you get involved by contrast with fiction, because usually when you're getting to an editor, you aren't just sort of starting to think of the idea and it isn't structured the same way as nonfiction. So at what point are you usually getting involved in the process?
Generally, an author has finished the book and gone through it multiple times at this point. I mean, I guess often they've sent the book out to their friends and whatnot, and are not necessarily getting back prescriptive advice. Everyone's like, "Oh, this is fantastic." No one wants to, tell their friend that they've got months and months more work to do. But also, I think it really helps to have somebody come in, having not seen it before. When I go through a manuscript, even before I go through it slowly for a line edit, I just read it once very, very quickly as though I'm a first-time reader. And a lot of times when these authors have been working on these books for so long, it's really hard to see the forest for the trees. And there's some characters that they might identify with that might be based on them or somebody that they know well, and they just kind of assume that everyone understands the reasons for why they're making decisions or their internal thought processes. So pointing out when that's not happening is important. Because at some point you can't realize it when you know your characters so well. At the other side of things, oftentimes authors are just bludgeoning you over the head with facts over and over and over again. It's just like, no, you've already done a good job. We actually can put ourselves in these characters' shoes. So you no longer need to explain to us every little thing that's going into their thought process. So both in terms of character arc, I actually find often the characters drive the plot more so than plotting works, than plotting by itself. When you've been working with a book for so long that you're no longer able to kind of step back from it and see how other people are going to react to it for the first time, I think that's really important.
Definitely. So I have a question for each of you, and maybe you can each answer, because I think your answers may be different. And maybe we'll start with Zach. What makes your job, what's your ideal client, your ideal scenario that makes it really, really easy for you to work well as an editor?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's coming to the table with, a fresh idea. That's obviously always enjoyable for me. A lot of times authors will, in this space, they come up with an idea, but they haven't necessarily done a lot of research on it, or they may have kind of, written down some notes, and that's okay. But a lot of times, if they don't see what else is out there in the market, they might be surprised to find out that this idea has already been done, and they have to kind of rework where they're going with it. And I'm always happy to help at that stage. But it is really nice when they arrive with fresh idea, ready to go. They have plans for how to move forward. I think it just has a lot to do with the pre-work and the preparation, and so we can kind of hit the ground running together.
Great. Okay, what about for you, Aaron?
Well, we only take on or offer to take on projects that New York book editors that we already kind of feel a connection to, and we realize more whether or not we're going to have a good working relationship with the author once we do a phone call. So. And before the phone call happens, we always do a sample line edit. I guess people talk a lot about, when they're writing novels themselves, they don't try to read other people's novels because that person's voice might seep in and they're going to lose their own voice when they're writing. I'm not sure if other authors have talked about that. I try not to read other novels when I'm working with an author simply because I want to be able to, at some level, emulate their own voice. So when I'm writing down a different way to do a sentence, I'm trying to think about it the way that they would approach it, but show a different approach. So when I see an author with a lot of talent, but I know I can get them to the next level, and they already appreciate what the sample edit's going to be like, and we just kind of feel chemistry on the phone. That's what I want to take on. It's just so exciting to watch people grow. Oftentimes, once you give a bunch of suggestions, it's kind of overwhelming. I like authors to kind of put the book aside for a couple months before they even come back to it, so they can see the suggestions. And generally, people really come around, see things they haven't seen before. It's just such a rewarding process.
Amazing. So one thing I would love for people to take away from this call, and again, I'd love to have each of your thought process, is if you can share any kind of common traps that people get stuck in that you find over and over again you have to help them with as an editor. Maybe we'll start with Zach.
Sure. I think this kind of goes back to, what I was saying a minute ago to a certain extent, is just really kind of having, being prepared, figuring out, what does an introduction of a typical, nonfiction prescriptive book look like, and what information is included in that introduction. Again, figuring out the structure early on, getting that table of contents down, trying to avoid repetition, coming in with those things, will help you avoid some of those traps. I also think too, with the type of books I work on, mostly, a lot of authors are hoping that, they have an idea that they can pitch and they're just ready to go, but they don't necessarily have a platform to pitch it from. And, you find that a lot of these prescriptive nonfiction books, whether you're going to an agent or to an editor, at a house, they're going to want some type of platform that they can help you, help you promote the book as well, but also realize that you're going to be able to put in kind of the marketing support and other related support in that sense. So I think those are a couple of things that you want to kind of get figured out early on, and it'll make your life a lot easier once you're getting to the point of pitching the book, publishing the book if you're self-publishing, and trying to really get the word out there about what you're working on and what you want to do with the book.
Absolutely. What about for you, Aaron?
There's a couple things. Most of the first 15% and the last 15% of books, I think, are kind of the most important in terms of getting narrative drive and building up momentum, really getting the readers into the story. And I find I basically go at editing those sections or making recommendations as to how to approach those sections as just going at it with machete. There's beautiful fluid language is great and stuff, but until you're like really connected to a character or time period, or ideally both, there is no reason to really get into that. You want to just start with a bang, and people often hear that. I guess agents are just going to look at the first couple pages of a book. That's true, and what a lot of people don't realize is, then I'm just going to come up with the truth here. Most editors claim that they read books from the entire book from an agent if it's a good agent. Not true. Not true at all. I always tried to read 30 pages, but if it was not really jumping out for me, because sometimes somebody just is horrible at the beginning and has just kind of overworked that, knowing that that's going to be the case, and they just can't understand, I guess, what the novel needs in terms of that. So sometimes there's a nice surprise after you're done with the first 20 pages. You're like, oh, this person's got it, but 99% of the time it's not true. So I really like going at just kind of going at things. I'm not going to say machete anymore. Let's go with meat cleaver.
Wow.
At the beginning. The other thing, which I guess people are just kind of aware that sales forces at publishing companies are, as Zach said, kind of trying to mention, this is also true for fiction, when they're trying to sell to Barnes & Noble or whatnot, they're trying to link it up to another book. Well, this is just like Michael Crichton. Michael Crichton sold 5 billion copies, so this is just like that. And that's just something that they're going to say. Oftentimes, authors try to kind of jump into that, or I guess write with that in mind. I'm going to write a book just like Michael Crichton. It's a horrible idea. You're going to lose your entire voice approaching it that way. Leave it to the people at the sales force to make up the lies about what the book is like.
That brings me to another question I have for both of you, which is, I often see a way that people, I think writers have a tendency to torture themselves. I don't think this is, a unique premise, but that given that writers work with language, they're particularly adept at coming up with insults or fears or whatever else that comes up as they're talking to themselves. One of which is, what am I going to do with this book when it's done? Or who am I going to sell it to? Or how am I going to do it? And I generally try to encourage them to stick with the book and make the book as good as possible before even considering the marketing. However, there is this catch-22 situation that you brought up, Zach, of people getting a better chance if they have some sort of platform. So do you have any thoughts about balancing, focusing on the writing, but also realizing that later you're going to want to engage with the world and being prepared to do so?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that a lot of times, I would never want to discourage anyone. I wouldn't want to discourage anyone to write. If they have a genuine interest in whether you're talking about the craft, on the fiction side of things, or they want to, get out there and try to figure out a way to help someone with a, prescriptive nonfiction work. I never, want to discourage anyone from, going forward, and trying it out and seeing what can happen there, because you never know. But, I think, when it comes to the practical matters of things like platform, it is important to keep in mind. I don't want to lie and say, oh, if you have a great idea, any editor is going to see through, just see that immediately and go and run with it. A lot of times it really does come down to making sure you both have a great idea and, again, some footing to stand on to kind of push that idea out there. But that said, I mean, you don't have to be, writing for the Times or whatever. You don't have to be a world-class journalist or anything like that. I mean, if you've written a few blog posts, if you have a couple of small articles out there, if whatever space you're working in that you are likely writing about, if you have any awards in that area, or if you spoke at any conferences, or there's any media coverage on that work. And again, it doesn't have to be, a huge thing, but just so I think it shows people, editors and agents, that you're really serious about this and what you're doing here. And I think sometimes that probably comes up in fiction as well. If someone sees that an author has an MFA, they obviously know that they've taken the time and effort to kind of, to try to move their craft forward, or move their work forward. And so I think it's definitely something to keep in mind. But yeah, I definitely don't want anyone to get discouraged or, avoid writing simply because they don't have, a million Twitter followers or something like that.
Right. Absolutely. And what about for fiction?
A platform can be nice if, say, like, you've got a story that's going to work for off the book pages, be it like, I was in the CIA, or I spent 8 years in a North Korean prison camp. That's interesting. That's a platform. And in general, honestly, I think platform is bullshit. I think that the book is going to speak for itself when it comes to fiction. It's nice if you have, a million Twitter followers. Most people don't. You're going to be forced, if you go with a major publisher, to put up a website. 40 people are going to look at it most likely. And, if you're an interesting person, you're going to build your own platform when you're doing interviews or I guess, like, when you're doing readings. But I mean, people will tell you otherwise. But having spent 10 years doing this at the big publishers and the medium-sized publishers, I think platform is bullshit when it comes to fiction.
You heard it right here. Don't worry about platform if you're a fiction writer.
Yeah, exactly.
Just
They'll make
forget
up make platform for you. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
novelists are relieved, but the nonfiction writers are.
I know there's sighs in both directions happening.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about when somebody feels it's time to involve an editor in their writing process. I've had a little bit of sort of, I don't want to say angst exactly, but it is a bit of angst that has come up with people talking to me about, like, well, I think I might want an editor, but I'm not sure. And then there's a lot of the phenomenon of, like, not that I want to compare the two professions exactly, but like if someone is coming over to clean, then you feel like you have to clean the whole house so it's perfect so that they don't think, oh my God, how would they make any mistakes? So then you have people who have a manuscript that they want to send to an editor, but they're like, if there's a single typo in there, they're going to think I'm an idiot. How do you feel that people need to get ready, or at what stage should they think about, okay, it's time to work with an editor?
Zach, I'm going to let you go first on this.
No.
Let me somebody else.
Yeah, no. So like I was saying earlier on, I think for some of these prescriptive nonfiction books, it is helpful to speak with an editor earlier on in the process. But I mean, there are some people that are, that have written books previously or have a lot of writing experience. They know what they want to say, and, they have a very specific vision, and it might be very spot on. They know their audience. If they've been out there in this space for a while, they know who they're speaking to and how to get points across. And so if that's the case, and, they're a little bit further on, I think getting to a level that they're comfortable with the manuscript, they know it needs a little bit of work or maybe a lot of work, but, they have the whole thing written and ready to go. I can see that, as a good time to bring on an editor for, the line edit. So the developmental edit would be, previous to that, when you're kind of working at the earliest stages of the book or, the proposal. And then the line edit would come in after you've actually gotten, a full first or maybe even second draft down. And the line edit too, and again, I know people run into this kind of confusion, is, even prior to a copy edit. The line edit is really just kind of to help the author get their ideas across, make sure they're coming across clear, It's not that every comma needs to be in the right place. That'll happen in the copy edit. There's no real reason to worry about that at the early stages, the first draft, second draft, even the third draft, if you're so inclined. So I think, going forward, if you have that idea ready, if you've written the book, if you feel pretty good about it, I think that's a good time to share it with an editor.
Great.
And don't worry about where those commas are, or that you used a semicolon incorrectly or whatever. That's not the time to worry about that by any means.
Great. Any thoughts for fiction?
I mean, I've never cared about copy edits either. I've never done copy edits, actually. So a line edit is a very different thing, obviously, as is a structural edit. I would say if an editor is going to take on your project and or looks at your project and wants to have a conversation with you, which I think you should do before you sign on an editor, you just want to see how excited they are. I actually love working with authors that are having some difficulties, just kind of watching them grow. And I think you need to talk them through it. And, this is a learning process. I really don't think that you should have any fear about going in for an edit if you're comfortable with the way your characters are and you're comfortable with the plot arc. That's not to say that I'm going to agree, or any editor is going to agree with the plot arc. There might be one thing you change that's going to make the entire book just much, much more palatable to readers. Or there might be a main character where you should actually bump up this character. This is the soul of the novel. This person needs to be in the background. That could be an issue. But at the same time, we enjoy doing that. I really feel like if you have a connection with the editor and they connect to your work, there's really nothing to be afraid about as long as you're happy with the work you put in and you're ready to go into it as a learning experience.
Great. And that you perfectly set up my next question, which is awesome. Maybe we can bring Natasha on for this one. And that is, if somebody's starting to think, okay, I think I want to work with an editor, what are the first steps that they take getting involved, at least from your viewpoint, since you do connect people with editors?
So the first step is genre, which sounds so simple, but some authors think they're writing in one genre, but it turns out they're not. So looking at their work, reading a sample, figuring out what their genre might actually be. The next step is, and I think Aaron briefly mentioned this, some people aren't ready for a professional edit yet, and we let those people know if that's the case and give them usually a list of recommendations, what they should read in their genre or on writing, and sort of advise them on how to work on it a little bit more on their own first. If they are ready, then we look at the stage of which the manuscript is. So some editors, and since we've worked with most of the team for years, by now we sort of know their preferences. Some editors really enjoy working with authors who are earlier on, who are first-time authors. Maybe their work isn't as developed yet. And other editors are looking for, more veteran authors to work with. So we take that into consideration as well. And then we send the editor the submission. They let us know if it has really resonated with them. If it does, that's when the author gets the editor's profile.
Got it.
And that's when we start the trial edit and the phone call to just make sure that that connection that we think should be there really is there.
So what happens in a trial edit? I think these are things that everybody it's like finishing your book and then there's this long, dark hallway that you go through and you're not quite sure what happens next. So if we could break that down a little bit, I think it would be so helpful.
Sure. So a trial edit with us is about 10 pages, 2,500 words that the editor reads through and writes down sort of like a brief memo, a few paragraphs with their thoughts on this, really initial glimpse of the manuscript, and line edits a few of the pages, 1,500 words. And then it's the phone call that's really the big part of the trial edit, I think. The edit, since the editor hasn't read the manuscript and doesn't have a comprehensive idea of what's involved, really the edits that are happening at that level can't authoritative. So it's just a glimpse of kind of to give the author an idea of the way the editor would approach their work. And an idea.
I think I should add just really fast.
Sure.
So you just skipped over this. There's also a plot synopsis that we get in addition to those pages.
Yeah, the memo. Yeah.
No, plot synopsis from the author.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
that's
no,
right.
don't worry about
That's in the submission material. Yeah. Do you guys have something to add to the trial edit?
I mean, I think that basically covers it. I think as Aaron said earlier as well, that first phone call that comes after the trial edit to kind of talk through what you've worked on, to go over any questions the author has. Not even just about the line edit either, but just kind of how the process works. It gives the editor the time to kind of get an idea of what the author has in mind in regards to their goals and kind of what they plan on doing with the book, if they kind of are at that stage at that point and know what they want to do with the book. So I think that conversation after they get the chance to review the edits is really important, and a good time to figure out, if it's a good match and fit to work together.
Great.
Yeah, I think you can see just in those 1,500 words whether or not the editor gets your voice.
Yeah.
And I think generally, I assume most editors do this. When I do those 1,500 words, I'm putting in every possible comment you could do, much more so than anyone would do in a full manuscript. It's a pretty limited number of pages to show what an edit actually consists of and how you could help them. So doing it that way too, it's an overwhelming 5 pages you're getting. So if an author is just like, oh my God, this is too much, then they're going to know it right there. But that's usually not the case. Usually people really take the advice well.
And I think it's eye-opening because the first few pages usually are the most worked and reworked and revised pages you have. So when you see the changes that are being recommended on those, most authors tend to think, wow, wait till I get the rest of the manuscript back.
Well, that sort of answers my next question, which is, is it recommended that you do the first pages of the book rather than another portion that maybe you're most interested in, how they would handle it?
I don't think that's the case. I think you should probably send in whatever portion you think is strongest. But I guess this speaks to what I was saying before. I really want the first 15% and the last 15% to be, what hits hard. I hope you feel most comfortable with your first, 15 pages. If you don't, you should work on those.
Right, exactly.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, I just meant if there's a scene that's particularly resonant or a turning point scene that feels really significant for fiction, would you ever use that as opposed to... Certainly, without a doubt. Without a doubt. Great. So then after that, let's say you've had the phone call, you've gone through, you've seen all of the markups all over your pages, and you're ready to move forward. What happens next?
Should I?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it,
Go
Aaron.
ahead. Yeah.
Oh, okay. At that point, after the call, if the author wants to proceed, and if you feel chemistry with your editor, the entire manuscript is sent to the editor, and the editor goes through the whole manuscript and kind of realizes whether or not they're going to recommend a structural edit or a line edit at that point, and just kind of sees what condition the book is in, and then makes a recommendation to the author. I think this is the way to proceed. If an author wants to do a line edit and you don't think it's in their best interest, it's just going to be a waste of time for them because you're going to make all kinds of major recommendations that are going to involve changing entire chapters and whatnot, or entire plot arc, then I guess you do not have the connection with the editor that you want. Usually people agree with our decisions in that. And if they don't, there's really no reason to proceed, I guess, if somebody thinks they're ready for the line edit and they're just not. But we evaluate the entire manuscript at that point.
Yeah, and I think that initial editorial assessment is really helpful for the author as well, in my experience. So even if they are kind of in that mindset that they want to kind of plow through, they're ready for the line edit, they want to get this thing out there. I think the majority of the time I find that taking a step back, slowing things down, and doing that initial editorial assessment and really helping them kind of get things in line to make that next step to that line edit or wherever it may go.
And would that process be the same, Zach, if someone is doing, say, a proposal? would you work on that the same way? Would they send like part of a sample chapter, or if someone was going to work on you with an editor as a proposal, how would that look?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I just recently I'm actually speaking with an author later today about a proposal that he had sent in, and so that is a way to approach it, to send the you can send the whole proposal, and typically what I've done is that I'll look at the whole proposal, I'll still read the first 1,500 words, or I'll read the first 2,500 words, and do a line edit of the first 1,500 if that like makes sense at that point. I think a lot of times though with the proposal, it's more kind of helping them realize what should be in it, what's landing, what's not, and then once you get into that next step, I can help with the sample chapter, because you want to have a sample chapter or two at least, and so and also help with the annotated table of contents, and then at that point I can really do a full on line edit. But earlier on in the process, it's more kind of just helping them get it organized, figure out what they need to have in there, and going from there.
Got it. So Natasha, what is the timeline once the editors get the full manuscript?
Usually if you're doing the full edit with a line edit, it's usually 6 to 8 weeks, the turnaround time.
Got it.
For a critique, it could be 4 to 6 weeks. So that takes a little bit less time on average.
Got it. And so the other question I have, just in terms of industry standard, because I know both Zach and Aaron have worked for traditional publishers and are now working independently, potentially both with traditionally published and independently published authors. I'm wondering if is a difference in what you're seeing between sort of the needs of independently published authors versus those going with a traditional publisher. Let's start with Zach.
Sure. I find that, kind of in this, this newer world of publishing, with so many options for hybrid publishing and, self-publishing and whatever, other models in between people are developing now. They still need the same type of professional, editorial work, that any traditional publisher would need. I think that in my experience, again, with the prescriptive type work, I don't, I was talking about the platform earlier. I don't want the authors to worry quite as much about their platform if they're self-publishing. Because they don't necessarily need to be pitching themselves as hard to an agent or an editor. So that's the only thing I kind of think about. But to be honest, I would still give the same advice about trying to build their platform, because that's really how they're going to sell their book on their own as well. So really, at the end of the day, I approach projects the same, except if you are, as an author, if you're really stuck on your idea and you really kind of want to stick to kind of what you've had planned out, and you're planning to self-publish, you want to take some chances that you might not take with traditional publishing, I think that would be the only thing I would kind of consider. But again, at the end of the day, I would still be doing the same type of work and helping the author in the same way.
Got it.
For once, I've got a short answer for you as to that, which is I approach things completely the same. There's absolutely no difference in the way I approach things, be it self-publishing or looking for a traditional publisher.
Got it. I have one question, though, in addition to that for you, Aaron. Do you find, here's my follow-up. Do you find that people are going through an edit with novels before submitting it to agents or publishers? So would you have someone who wanted to go for traditional publishing but is working with you first because with novels, you submit the full manuscript from the beginning rather than having the option of submitting a proposal, say, with a nonfiction book?
Mm-hmm. A lot of authors come to us before they submit to agents. Some submit to a couple agents, hear some feedback, and realize that they want to deal with the editor beforehand. I'm not sure if you've had agents on your program before, but editors are getting 40, 50 manuscripts a week in from agents. And, you've got some editorial assistants and whatnot to help you out with that. Just kind of cull things down to the ones that really need attention, that are going to turn into bidding wars quickly. Anyway, agents are, I can't even imagine how overwhelmed they are with manuscripts. So you actually really want to do some of their work for them, both in kind of pitching yourself, I guess rather pitching the book, but most importantly, just having the book in a form where an editor will pick it up. So yeah, I think most editors, most authors come to us before pitching an agent, and I think that's the way to go. I think if you're not sending things in almost the form where they're ready for a publisher already, you might be burning bridges.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Aaron.
Awesome. I have one more thought. Natasha and I talked about something when we first spoke before planning this panel episode. One thing that we were really excited about, and something that has been coming up in conversation that I've had with writers for a long time, is the fact that when we're writing, we're comparing our work in progress with finished books that have been edited and gone over by everybody in a publishing team and ended up on a bookshelf. And so it isn't really a fair comparison of, you never get to see kind of the author's early drafts and what happens as they work through it. So we had an idea, and I'm wondering if you can say more about, Natasha, about a way to kind of peel back the curtain a little bit so that people can see how this process works.
Yeah, so we wanted to put together, and we are putting together, a sort of exercise where you get to see a few pages of an earlier draft and then take a look at the edits that are being introduced to it, so that you can really see the difference of what happens as you're right, it's a very, very long process, and there are many iterations that take place before the book hits the shelves. But this is sort of a glimpse into the first one.
She's talking about the edits for somebody else's book, just so you can kind of get an idea.
Yes.
So you're looking at basically oh, look, here's 10 pages. Look at all these changes, and you kind of see what the author adopted. So
right.
Before and after. Yep.
Exactly. So we're going to have a link in the show notes to where you can download this and take a look for yourself and get an idea kind of from inside, because it's great for all of us to have this conversation and talk about it in an abstract form, but I think it's a completely different experience to be able to look at a piece of work and to see what happened, what kind of transformation is possible in the editing process, so that you can kind of imagine that for your own book.
And I would also challenge people when they're looking at the first few pages to think about the changes they would introduce before they look at sort of the answer, what an editor actually did, because that's always been a revelation for me. I look at pages and think about what I would do, and sometimes I'm at a loss, and then I see the editor's changes and I think, oh my God, how did I not see that? That makes it so much better.
Yeah, you can get out your little red pen, read the first couple of pages, play editor, and then see what the editors have done. And then it may help you as you're working on your own book. I hope this does not fuel your internal critic, but gives you an idea of what's possible and how your book can transform, and that you come up with the idea and you write it yourself, but there are people available to help you to get it into that form that you see on the bookshelf at the end. So I want to thank all of you so much for persevering through innovative technology, intercontinental discussion, and making this episode happen. I know that the editorial process is one that people ask about often, have been really eager to learn more about, and I know everyone will be delighted to have learned so much from all three of you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for listening to the Secret Library podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this week's show. You can keep the conversation going by leaving a comment in the show notes at secretlibrarypodcast.com, or visit us on Facebook at facebook.com/secretlibrarypodcast. You can also connect directly with me on Twitter or Instagram, where I'm Caro Donahue. That's at CaroDonahue. I look forward to chatting with you there. See you next week. Until then, happy writing.